Hi guys, so today we're going to complete the femur. The femur is basically one of the largest bones of your body. It's the main bone of the thigh. To understand the side determination of the femur, we must know that it bears an upper rounded head, whereas the lower end is expanded to form the two large condyles. The head is directed medially, the cylindrical shaft is convex forwards. So if you see it from sideways, you know that this is convexing forwards. Moving on, the head is directed medially, upwards and slightly forwards. The why is this happening? It's because the head should be directed medially upwards and forwards in order to bring the two condyles in the same vertical plane, same horizontal plane, sorry. And that is needed to form the knee joint with the tibia and fibula. In order to bring the lower condyles, the surface of the lower condyles in a same horizontal plane, the head has to be directed medially upwards and slightly forwards. Moving on, the head bears a the upper end of femur bears a head, and then there's an area, the fovea capitis, which is devoid of the capsule of the hip joint, and then there's a on the posterior side of the upper end we have a greater trochanter, we have a lesser trochanter. Both of them are joined by the intertrochanteric crest. On the anterior side there's the intertrochanteric line. Moving on, the head is directed upward, medialward, and a little forward. Most of it is coated with cartilage except the fovea capitis. Why is it not coated with cartilage? It's because this area has the attachment to the ligament of head of the femur, which is the ligamentum teres. So it's a overt depression. And then here you can see the image I'm showing you is the trochanteric fossa. Now the trochanteric fossa is important. Why? Because the obturator externus inserts into this trochanteric fossa. Okay. Moving on. Let's go. So the neck of femur is a flattened pyramidal process of bone connecting the femoral head with the shaft. We also know that the head and shaft form an angle. The angle is 8 normally in adults. Now this neck is a constricted region that connects the head with the shaft, and on that, if you can see that the anterior side is flattened and the posterior side is a little convex, which is also giving the depression of the intertrochanteric crest. Now, the neck has a superior border and an inferior border. It's contracted in the middle and then broader laterally and then medially. The neck is about 3.7 centimeters long. It has two borders and two surfaces, the upper border and the superior border and the inferior border, and then the anterior surface and the posterior surface. Now, the anterior surface is flat. It meets the shaft at the intertrochanteric line. It is entirely capsular. The anterior surface of the neck is perforated by numerous vascular foramina. The posterior surface is smooth and it is broader and more concave than the anterior surface. The posterior part of the capsule of the hip joint is attached 1 centimeter above the intertrochanteric crest. The posterior surface is convex from above downwards and concave from side to side. So if basically the posterior surface, if you go from side to side, it's convex from above downwards, right? It's a little convex if I go from up to down, and but side to side, it's concave, right? So it's concave from side to side, but convex from up to down, and it meets the shaft at the intertrochanteric crest, and then we had a trochanteric fossa in which the obturator externus was inserting. Now, the posterior surface is crossed by a horizontal groove for the insertion tendon of the obturator externus to be inserted into the trochanteric fossa. The trochanteric shaft angle is about 8 in adults and gives an idea about direction of medullary canal and its alignment with the greater trochanter. The neck of femur. Now, the superior border is short and thick, which I was talking about here. This is short and thick, obviously, compared to this longer inferior border, and ends laterally at the greater trochanter. Its surface is perforated by large foramina. It is concave and horizontal, meets the shaft at the greater trochanter. The inferior border, this is long and narrow, curves a little backward to end at the lesser trochanter. Here, it's ending at the lesser trochanter. It is straight and oblique, meets the shaft near the lesser trochanter. The neck makes an angle with the shaft called the neck shaft angle. Normal is 125 in adults, but less in females due to their wider pelvis. Now, the greater trochanter. Now, the greater trochanter is basically a large, irregular quadrilateral eminence, and it's directed laterally and medially and slightly posterior. So basically, this is laterally, medially, and slightly posterior. In the adult, it's about 2 to 4 centimeters lower than the femoral head. As you can see that this is my head and this is my greater trochanter. So in the adult, it's 2 to 4 centimeters lower than the head. Okay. I told you it's directed laterally. This head is directed laterally. It's a little lateral. It's and medially and slightly posterior. So it's also medial from the posterior part and also posterior because it's going all the way to the posterior side, right? Okay, greater trochanter has an upper border with an apex. So this is the upper border and this is the apex. This is the upper border and this is the apex. And then we have three sides. We have a lateral side, we have an anterior side, and we have a posterior side, which is also called the medial side. Now the apex is the intern posterior part of the posterior border. So basically, if I go and see that this is the posterior border, so this is the intern part, the apex of the greater trochanter. The greater trochanter's anterior surface is rough in its lateral part. So this is the anterior surface of the greater trochanter, and it's a little rough in its anterior part. You can literally feel it when you touch it. The lateral surface, which is the biggest surface of the greater trochanter, it's quadrilateral. It's broad and it's rough and it's convex. It's like curved outward, so it's convex and it's marked by a diagonal impression. There's a diagonal impression. Can you appreciate this here? So this diagonal impression is serves as the insertion for the tendon of the gluteus medius. So the gluteus medius is coming to the greater trochanter's lateral surface, and the gluteus medius is supplied by the superior gluteal nerve. Okay. The lateral surface is crossed by an oblique ridge directed downwards and forwards. Now, this oblique ridge that I was talking about directs downwards and forwards. Now, the greater trochanter, the medial surface. Now, coming to the medial surface. This is our medial surface. Okay, the medial surface of much less extent than the lateral present at its base a deep depression. This is that deep depression they're talking about. Okay, and this is basically, if I tell you, this deep depression is basically the trochanteric fossa. Okay, and this trochanteric fossa is there for the insertion of the obturator externus, and above and in front of this is an impression for the insertion of the obturator internus and superior inferior gemellus muscles. So you go to the trochanteric fossa here, and you know that this itself is the insertion of the tendon of the obturator externus. But also above and in front of this is an impression for the insertion of the obturator internus, superior and inferior gemellus muscles. Now, revising the greater trochanter, we said that the gluteus medius is coming to the lateral surface of the greater trochanter, and all the others are inserting in the front and above the trochanteric fossa. Then we had the gluteus minimus, which was in the forefront of the greater trochanter. Piriformis is another muscle which inserts in the superior border of the greater trochanter. Gemellus superior, gemellus inferior, both of them go to the upper and lower edge of the obturator internus tendon. So the obturator externus goes into the trochanteric fossa, and the obturator internus tendon goes front and above the trochanteric fossa, where upper edge is taking the insertion of the gemellus superior and the lower edge is taking the insertion of the gemellus inferior. Now the lesser trochanter, it's a conical posterior medial projection of the shaft of the femur, projecting from the posterior inferior aspect of its junction with the femoral neck. So this is the femoral neck. The summit and the anterior surface of the lesser trochanter are rough. You can feel it, it's rough, whereas the posterior surface is smooth. The summit is rough, but the posterior surface is smooth. Okay? Now, the lesser trochanter. The summit of the lesser trochanter gives insertion to the tendon of the psoas major muscle and the iliacus muscle. The psoas major and iliacus are inserting into the lesser trochanter's summit. Okay, the lesser trochanter represents the principal attachment of this iliopsoas. Now, if you look at this picture, I mean, if you go a little medially to the shaft, you have the muscle pectineus, you have the muscle adductor magnus, and then you have the muscle adductor brevis. So these three are on the shaft area. And since we have the crest area, we know this is the posterior side of the shaft, right? So the posterior side of the shaft, if you go from medial to lateral, you have the muscle pectineus, you have the muscle adductor brevis, and you have the muscle adductor magnus. Okay? Now, intertrochanteric line. The intertrochanteric line is on the anterior side of the bone. This is the greater trochanter. This is the lesser trochanter, and this is the crest. Then on the anterior side is the intertrochanteric line. It's a line upon the anterior aspect of the proximal end of the femur, extending between the lesser trochanter and the greater trochanter. It is a rough variable edge. The intertrochanteric line provides attachment to the capsular ligament of the hip joint. Attached to the upper band of this line is the upper band of the iliofemoral ligament, and attached to the lower band of this line is the lower part of the iliofemoral ligament. Now, the origin to the highest fibers of the vastus lateralis come from the upper part, and the origin to the highest fibers of the vastus medialis come from the lower end. So if you remember, the anterior muscles of the thigh were rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedialis, and then there was articulus genu. So on the anterior side, just remember that the origin to the highest fibers of the vastus lateralis comes from the upper part of this line, and the lower part gives origin to the highest fibers of the vastus medialis. We will see that these two muscles originate from here, but then come back a little on the anterior side, and then on a little bit on the posterior side, and insert near the medial and lateral ends on the posterior side where we had the linea aspera. Okay, so coming back to our intertrochanteric crest, the intertrochanteric crest is a prominent smooth bony ridge upon the posterior surface of the femur at the junction of the neck and the shaft of the femur, together with the intertrochanteric line. All of this marks the transition between the femoral neck and the femoral shaft. Okay, there's a quadrate tubercle. So on the posterior side, after you pass the greater trochanter and you're following this crest, there's a quadrate tubercle. Now, what is this quadrate tubercle? It lies on the junction of the upper 1/3 and the lower 2/3 of the intertrochanteric crest. So this quadrate tubercle is the main site of insertion of the quadratus femoris muscle. Okay. Now, coming on to the shaft is more or less cylindrical. It is narrowed in the middle and is more expanded inferiorly than superiorly. We can see that. It is convex forwards. If I see it sideways, it's convex forwards and is directed obliquely downwards and medially. Okay, because the upper ends of the two femurs are separated by the width of the pelvis. So the width of the pelvis is basically the upper end of the two femurs, and their lower ends are closer together because they have to come a little medially to form a horizontal plane for the knee joint. In the middle 1/3, the shaft has three borders. The shaft has three borders: medial, lateral, and posterior. So this is your medial border, this is lateral border, and this is the posterior border. But in the upper end and the lower end, the linea aspera diverges to enclose another surface. Therefore, in the upper and lower end, it has four borders and three surfaces. Okay, because the linea aspera diverges posteriorly in the upper part and then diverges again posteriorly in the lower part. The medial and lateral borders are rounded and ill-defined, but the posterior border is very prominent in a very broad form. This is the linea aspera, which has two lips. They diverge up and then it joins together and diverges down again to enclose the popliteal surface. Okay. Moving on, the shaft, the linea aspera has distinct medial and lateral lips. The medial and lateral surfaces are directed more backwards than towards the sides. In the upper 1/3 of the shaft, the two lips of the linea diverge to enclose an additional posterior surface. Thus, this part has four borders. So the upper part has four borders: medial, lateral, and spiral line, and the lateral lip of the gluteal tuberosity. Okay, so we have the medial and lateral borders, and then we have when the linea aspera is diverging, it forms two lines here. One line is coming from the gluteal tuberosity and the other line is the spiral line. Okay, these are the two lines. And then again in the lower part, again we have four surfaces because the gluteal tuberosity okay, so just stay in the upper part for now. We have an anterior, medial, lateral, and posterior surface, right? So we have an anterior, we have a medial, lateral, and then we have a posterior surface. How is this possible? Because the gluteal tuberosity line and the line of the spiral line were both coming on the posterior side as divergences of linea aspera itself. Okay. So the gluteal tuberosity is a broadened, roughened ridge on the lateral part of the posterior surface. So if I come on the posterior side and I go a little laterally, what will I see? The gluteal tuberosity here. Okay. I think I'll show it to you on another image. In the lower one third of the shaft, um, the two lips of the linea aspera diverge and they enclose the popliteal surface. They diverge as supracondylar lines to enclose an additional popliteal surface. So this part has four borders: the medial lateral and medial supracondylar line and lateral supracondylar line. So you have four surfaces: anterior, medial, lateral, and popliteal. The medial and border and medial supracondylar line meet inferior to obliterate the medial surface. Okay, so this is a division of the medial one third, upper one third, and the lower one third of the shaft. Linea aspera. Now, the linea aspera is a ridge of roughened surface on the posterior surface of the shaft of the femur. Now, please look at this carefully. Now, we are on the posterior surface of the femur. Okay, so this is here you can see this is our gluteal tuberosity. Okay, now why is the gluteal tuberosity important? If you follow the gluteal tuberosity down, you will see that it merges with the linea aspera. So it's one of the lips. The line form passing from the gluteal tuberosity is one of the lips of the linea aspera. Okay, and the gluteal tuberosity is important because the gluteus maximus muscle inserts in the gluteal tuberosity, and the gluteus maximus was supplied by the inferior gluteal nerve. Just a little medially to these three muscles, to this gluteus maximus, we have three adductors: adductor magnus, adductor brevis, and adductor longus. All three of the adductors were supplied by the obturator nerve. Now, it is the site of attachments. This gluteal tuberosity is the site of attachment of the muscles and the intermuscular septum. It is a prominent longitudinal ridge or crest on the middle third of the bone. So this is, if you can see it here, this is your gluteal tuberosity here. It is a prominent longitudinal ridge or crest on the medial third of the bone, presenting a medial and lateral lip and a narrow, rough intermediate line. So this gives us this linea aspera itself. Let's just read over it again. The linea aspera is a ridge of roughened surface on the posterior surface of the shaft of the femur. It is the site of attachments of muscles and the intermuscular septum. It is a prominent longitudinal ridge or crest on the middle third of the bone, presenting a medial and a lateral lip. It is a narrow, rough intermediate line. It is an important insertion point for the adductors and the lateral and medial intermuscular septa that divides the thigh into the three compartments. So there's something that's dividing the thigh into three compartments, and this is basically done by the medial and lateral septa. Again, the linea aspera has two lips that diverge in the above of the femur, and then two lips that diverge in the below area, the lower one third of the femur. Okay, and now you can see that it is important because of the compartmentalization that it is doing of the thigh into three compartments. We will see those three compartments now. So this is one compartment, this is one compartment, and this is one compartment. Okay, and all of this happens around the linea aspera. If you go back and try to understand the linea aspera again, I will show you something. Wait. Okay, I'm back because I went for a few seconds just to get these two pictures. Okay, so can you please see on these two pictures, your confusion will be cleared. This is the posterior femur, right? So this is your pectineal line and this is your spiral line. The pectineal line is sort of continuing beneath the lesser trochanter. Then we have the pectineal line and then we have the spiral line. And this is where I told you is the gluteal tuberosity. So this is where I told you is the gluteal tuberosity, and the pectineal line is somewhere here, right? So this is your gluteal tuberosity. And the gluteal tuberosity also extends downwards as a line. Now these two lines converge to meet and make the linea aspera. And then going down the bone, they again diverge into the lateral and medial supracondylar line all in the while enclosing the popliteal surface. Here you can see even more clearly. This is the gluteal tuberosity and the gluteal tuberosity line. This is the spiral line, pectineal line, which both form the medial and lateral lips of the linea aspera. This is the medial labium and lateral labium, which both converge to form the linea aspera. And then again, they diverged in the lower 1/3 of the femur, posterior shaft of the femur, to form the medial supracondylar ridge and the lateral supracondylar ridge. Okay, I really hope it's clear now. I feel like I was confusing you guys. Okay. So the gluteal tuberosity is now it should be very, very clear. The gluteal tuberosity is the lateral one of the three upward projections or prolongations of the linea aspera of the femur, extending to the base of the greater trochanter. So this is the greater trochanter. You go to its base and you find the gluteal tuberosity. And this is the insertion point of the gluteus maximus. The gluteus maximus was the largest muscle, right, of the gluteus maximus, minimus, and medius, and the maximus was being supplied by the inferior gluteal nerve. It served as a principal insertion point for the gluteus maximus muscle. Moving on, we had the adductors. The adductors were very important. They were being supplied by the obturator nerve. The adductor tubercle is the tubercle on the lower extremity of the femur. So you go all the way, you take the bone in its actual axis, go all the way down, and then you find the adductor tubercle. So it is formed with the medial lips of the linea aspera. The medial lips of the linea aspera end below at the summit of the medial condyle. So this is the medial condyle, and this is where the linea aspera sort of ends to form the medial supracondylar line. It is the insertion point of the tendon of the vertical fibers of the adductor magnus muscle. So this is the adductor tubercle. Okay. And adductor magnus muscle inserts here the medial ridge of linea aspera and the adductor tubercle. Now we have a lateral epicondyle, and this is the lateral epicondyle and this is the medial epicondyle. Just put your femur in the right position from the upper part and trace it downward. So you had a medial epicondyle and the lateral epicondyle. Now the lateral epicondyle of the femur is smaller and less prominent than the medial epicondyle, and this gives attachment to the fibular collateral ligament of the knee joint. So remember that. Now, the lateral epicondyle has certain attachments. Now, under the lateral epicondyle here, we have the origin of the popliteus muscle. And then also lower 1/4 of the anterior femur deep to the vastus intermedius is the origin of the articulus genu muscle. Okay, so articulus genu comes off from here, and under the lateral epicondyle comes off the popliteal muscle, also gastrocnemius. So this was our adductor tubercle, right? So just behind the adductor tubercle, over the lateral epicondyle, this area, okay, just behind this adductor tubercle, over the lateral epicondyle and the popliteal facies. All of this area behind the adductor tubercle, over the lateral epicondyle, all of this area, and the popliteal facies, the popliteal fossa that was enclosed by the medial and lateral supracondylar lines. All of this gives origin to the gastrocnemius muscle. So the gastrocnemius muscle seems to be a very bulky muscle. We'll find out more about it when we do the leg. Now we have another muscle that comes off over the lateral epicondyle, and that is the plantaris muscle. Okay. So coming on to the medial epicondyle of the femur is a bony protrusion located on the medial side of the femur at its distal end. Located above the medial epicondyle is the adductor tubercle, which was taking the fibers of the adductor. We can see it, adductor magnus muscle. Okay, magnus because magnus means big. It's the biggest muscle of the three adductors. Located above the medial epicondyle is the adductor tubercle, which serves as the tendinous attachment of the superficial part or tendinous insertion of the adductor magnus. Behind it and behind and proximal to the medial condyle is a rough impression. This rough impression, which gives rise to the medial head of the gastrocnemius. We've already done the origin of the gastrocnemius. Now the lateral epicondyle, the lateral condyle. Okay, the lateral condyle is flat laterally and is more in line with the shaft if I keep it in a horizontal plane. So it takes more transmission of body weight to tibia compared to the medial epicondyle. It is stouter and it is stronger. The lateral aspect presents a following. Okay, a prominence called the lateral epicondyle, a popliteal groove which lies just below the epicondyle. So we have the popliteal groove here. Can you see this? This is the popliteal groove. Okay, and a muscular impression posterior superior to the epicondyle. Okay, so there's a muscular impression also here, the posterior superior to the epicondyle. Moving on, the medial condyle is convex. Medially, the most prominent is called the medial epicondyle, which is here. There is a projection, the adductor tubercle. This tubercle is an important landmark. The epiphyseal line for the lower end of femur passes through it. So you can see the epiphyseal line here. Can you see this epiphyseal line? Okay. The intercondylar fossa. We have an intercondylar fossa between the two condyles. This notch separates the lower and posterior parts of the two condyles. It is limited anteriorly by the patellar articular surface. This is the patellar articular surface. So anteriorly it is limited by the patellar articular surfaces and posteriorly by the intercondylar line. So there's an intercondylar line here. Can you see it? Posteriorly, it limits it, which separates the notch from the popliteal surface. This is the popliteal surface and this is the intercondylar notch, right? That's it, guys. Thank you so much. Please revise this before tomorrow's lecture.